Good morning, everyone. My name is Jared Morrison, and I'm Organization Development Consultant in the Learning and Organizational Development Unit for OSU Extension. And thank you all for joining us today for a Sell to Extension webinar. We are very excited about this webinar series. It's been going very well. We've had 3 sessions so far. This is the 4th, with 5 more to follow this. So we're excited about the partnership between Extension and the Department of Agricultural Communication, Education, and Leadership, which is ACEL. So as I say that acronym, that's what that means spelled out. Please, to learn a little bit more about the series, go to our page, which is go.osu.edu/ACEL2extension. And today we have effective meeting facilitation. We have Dr. Jared Niewaner Green, who is an assistant professor of community leadership in the Department of Agricultural Communication, Education, and Leadership. And without too much further ado, I'll pass it over to you, Jared. Thanks so much for being here this morning.
No problem. Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm going to turn off my camera in just a moment to kind of minimize some of the distraction, but I just wanted to greet everybody. So thanks for being here today. And this is how we're going to roll today. So first, we're just going to, I'm just doing a little welcome now, get to know each other just for a moment. I know we are online, but we can still get some information from one another, go over the objectives, and then there's 2 kind of main chunks for today. Setting the foundation, so thinking about how we set up meetings, and then also working the crowd, so thinking about our strategies and skills as a facilitator, and then hopefully have some time at the end for some Q&A. So first, looking at who I am and a little bit, I want to hear a little bit about who you are. And so I have been here since fall of 2017. I'm assistant professor at ACEL of community leadership. I teach undergraduate and graduate courses and also coordinate some programs. The leadership studies minor program is a university-wide program. In my research, I know this is a little vague, but I focus on gender and leadership a lot of times in agricultural settings and rural settings, and also looking at youth and leadership and their engagement in communities, in groups, and also starting to develop some study abroad programs for our college and for our department. And so looking at cultural competence and undergraduate experiences abroad and how that we can develop them to be better global leaders. So some of my previous experiences is my second career. I was a high school teacher for over a decade. I taught both Spanish and leadership. And also during that time, I was an academy coach. And what that is that we had career and technical education based academies in our high school. And so we had career and tech that would partner with English, science, social studies, all of the other teachers. They would create a team, and each academy had a team of teachers, and we also had business and post-secondary partners. And so my role was to set up advisory boards, manage those advisory boards, manage projects, work with professional development. So in both that role and my role as a teacher and my role here, I've done a lot of different facilitating. So whether that's workshops, facilitating change processes with students groups, meetings with colleagues, professional development workshops for faculty, staff. But I really like to think about my facilitation and leadership education, for that matter, actually starting in college, because I worked for the outdoor program as a coordinator. And so really outdoor education was where I first started to cut my teeth with facilitating team building activities, as well as planning meetings for trips. And that's where I realized I really liked working with groups. So that's a little bit about me. So using the chat, I really would like to know who is out there today. So if you could just share your position and if it's relevant, also your county that you're in, and just a little known fact about yourself. And so just use the chat function there, and let me know who you are. Jenna. Welcome. 12 different boards. Okay, that's a lot. Binger of Christmas Hallmark movies. Great, Amanda. A lot of those make me cry. And Jared is a published poet. That's awesome. Adventure Rec. All right. Youth Development with Urban Youth. That's great. Thanks, Valerie. Newspaper. Now they're coming in. All right. Sarah Creamer was first career in archaeology and still like dirt. That's great. Okay. And Amanda is very serious about efficiency. Binging West Wing over and over. Ashley, I still have not watched West Wing. That's one thing I need to get into that show. I've heard it's good. Any others out there? Skier and Hunter. Andrew, welcome. Hi, Kayla. Oh, yes. Kayla's the Wisconsin native, so we'll see how are you gonna root for that one? Maybe wear a dual jersey. That's probably a good idea.
Very politically correct.
Yeah. Cardinal red to be specific. Thanks, Kayla. Okay. So thanks you all for sharing. So that it's a little bit difficult when you're online to do different types of icebreakers. But those icebreakers and get to know you games are great for breaking the ice, and especially with folks who don't know each other very well, trying to get people a little bit more comfortable with one another. And so when you're thinking about choosing activity, think about how much time that you have, how well the group knows each other, and try to stay away from things that will embarrass people. And so really, some people are, especially during flu season, may not want to touch each other. So think about, people touching each other, sharing private information, making silly noises. A lot of times as adults, we might not want to make animal noises with each other. So there's a lot of games out there that use those, but sometimes they're not best for a professional setting. Also thinking about the objectives and purpose of the meeting or group. And so think about, what you like in an icebreaker and get to know you games, things that you've experienced, and what you may not like as you try to think about incorporating those some for your own meetings. These are some links that will be in your handout, and I can always send the PowerPoint to you as well. There are a ton out there. And then there was one specific link there that had some icebreakers for online meetings, and especially if everyone can weigh in on the camera and talk to one another, there's ways to get virtual teams to work together a little bit better from the get-go. So some objectives for today. So we're going to look at some fundamentals related to facilitating groups and meetings, and some techniques as well for garnering ideas and making decisions, and then looking at some skills you can develop to become a better facilitator. Although this is an hour webinar, and a facilitation workshop can be an entire day. So of course, this is just a sampling of some things to think. First of all, thinking about setting the foundation. So thinking about beginning with the end in mind. So there's a lot of different types of meetings that we might have. Information transmitting is one, and there's a little asterisk there because we need to think, does there even need to be a meeting? Other ones where we know that there does need to be a meeting, advancing thinking, which is where we might be creating a vision for the group or thinking through scenarios to meet a goal. Improving communication. So if there's something going on with your group and you need to work on team building, or there's some lingering frustrations about something that's going on, you might need to pull people together. Building community can look a few different ways. So that could be just coming together to celebrate successes, or again, like doing some other type of visioning and kind of coming together in a different way. Building capacity is thinking about training the team for a new project, giving them more skills for what they need to accomplish. Decision making, determining maybe what programs need to change to meet intended goals, or how are you looking at staffing. And providing input is obtaining opinions on a problem that needs to be solved. So thinking about what is your purpose of the meeting, and there may need to be a very deliberate process that's put into place so that you can walk away from that accomplishing your goal. So also think about who needs to be there. So this intersects with the purpose. So for example, if the focus is decision making, the number of attendees that are there is going to make a difference. If you have too big of a group, it might be hard to make some decisions. So think about who needs to be there in terms of your purpose. Also thinking about location and setup. So is it going to be accessible for people who need accommodations? Do you need to think about the seating, printed handouts? Also, how comfortable are people going to be there? Remember, temperature matters in terms of meetings. If everyone's too cold or too warm, or there's not a way to make folks comfortable, their minds are going to be elsewhere. How are people going to be sitting in order to engage? Do you need to have folks sitting in a circle or a semicircle so that folks might not be on their phone in the back and checked out a little bit? And also thinking about the chemistry and the culture of your group. So sometimes if you're pulling people together that you don't know, you're going to have to spend some time in the beginning getting to know each other more. And what if you do know the group a little bit more, what are the things that you know that they enjoy? What are some things that might make them frustrated? But thinking about that as you plan your meeting. So these are some building blocks of an effective agenda, and there is a resource down here at the bottom, Sam Kainer's book, Facilitator's Guide to Participatory Decision Making. This is a great book. I pulled some things from this for today's webinar, but I highly recommend if you're going to be doing a lot of different types of meetings and working with different groups, this is a great, great resource. But they set forth these building blocks of an effective agenda. You've got your topics. So what is it that you want to cover? From those topics, you want specific outcomes. So what are your goals related to these topics? And in order to meet your goals, you have to focus on the processes. So we're going to look at some different strategies today that help us reach those outcomes. But think about those things as you build in as you're building your agenda. So this is just a sample, thinking how to chunk things. You probably do want to include timeframes. As the first person in that group said, he was already like, how long is this meeting going to last? When are we getting out of here? So making sure you have a set time, not running over that time for the meeting. And then also you might want to put your timeframes next to each of your items, but not being too rigid if you think something might take a little bit longer. So giving yourself ample time within there. So starting the meeting some way, icebreaker, checking in with each other if you know each other really well. What are some celebrations? What's going on in people's lives? Then on to some easy items, and then thinking about your substantive sections. So name the topic that you're going to cover, describe the process you're going to go through with the group, proceed with the activities until your goal is met, and then identify action plans. So what is it that you're doing after this? Now, depending on how many things you have to cover, you might do 1 or 2 of these. Of course, you're going to want to break if it's more than 2 hours. And then maybe if this is some type of all-day event, then you're going on to some other sections. And then some way to complete the meeting. So this could be some type of evaluation, so you can get some feedback from folks that were there. You can also do some type of go-round for closure. So if everyone just wants a statement to say how they're feeling at the end of that day, or maybe just give them 7 words to describe what's going on or where they think the process is going next. And everyone can take a turn having a concluding thought, but making sure you kind of bring some closure there. Another important thing about thinking about the foundation are the ground rules and norms. And so these are some examples of things, and you can do this in a couple different ways. You can set the ground rules and norms and already have those for the group. if you want that type of control. Some people also like to develop these norms with the entire group so that there's more ownership there. When I worked with youth, I usually set the norms with them. And then if there's one that's not in there that I think is really important, I try to make sure that that's there as well. So thinking about how you want to deal with technology, asking questions, and we'll get to the parking lot in a moment because sometimes things can be off track. And you want to make sure you're still moving in the right direction. So having a way to kind of table those things, because you want to make sure that you address people's concerns and questions, even if it's not in that moment. Thinking about balancing participation. And then this is also important as well. Can we say everything in the room until we wait until later to raise an issue? So you might need to find some mechanisms in order to do that. Are there any other ground rules or norms that you all have felt were helpful in some meetings or workshops that you have participated in? Throw those up in the chat. Right, so Kayla said depending on the audience, letting the group give their recommended ground rules. So self-check on why am I talking, reminder, okay. And ground rules around respecting ideas, being yes instead of no, no, no on the back of name tags, I like that. And then having the group decide together how they will deal with phones, computers, etc. while in the meeting. Yeah, and those are great ideas, and especially with technology. And that's a tough one because we want to be connected, and sometimes, you know, people have family members that they need to check in with. They might have children that are at daycare. They need to make sure that no one's calling. So maybe having the group kind of talk about what some of their needs are for that, I think is really great. And then Francis said keeping it broad because at least with teens, because it can get tricky with too many ground rules. Yeah, especially thinking, you know, are there just like a few short phrases maybe that would be good for, so we can always just quickly go back to them if folks are getting off track. All right, thank you all. Okay, so the parking lot. So this is a space where questions can be stored. Because some people might not feel comfortable asking certain questions in the presence of others, and we want things to come out in that room and not people to talk about them later. So if there's a way that the facilitator can address them either with a larger group or then one-on-one during a break if need be. And so also participants might ask a challenging question. It could be deferred until later, or there might not be adequate time to address it fully at that time. So this kind of helps to keep the pace and keep things moving, but you have to find a way to follow up with those. They can't just kind of die off in the parking lot. So for today, since I'm asking you some questions kind of throughout the hour on the chat, if you have a question, if you could just jot it on a sticky note, and then we'll have some time in the Q&A and do a parking lot at the end. Oh, and Ashley mentioned like that there needs to be foundations for those who are hosting too. If we're inviting people here, we need to be engaged and not on our phones. And that's really important as well. So one thing about being a facilitator is that you are modeling behavior for the group. And so you're walking them through these processes. So however, how much you are engaged is going to be very reflective and then really impact the norms of the group. So thinking about some strategies and skills that a facilitator may have or can develop rather. So a facilitator is someone that is helping a team free itself from internal obstacles or difficulties so that members can more efficiently and effectively accomplish their goals. And so they're guiding without directing the team and helping them discover some ways to address challenges. And this is important while maintaining safety and trust among group members. So it's not just about going through the process, but how can you go through that process without upsetting too many folks? You might have to facilitate conflict, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But you know, how can we move them without you know, too much damage, right? And so also bringing in structures and processes to help the team accomplish those goals. And what's important here is that the facilitator is also appreciating and valuing what everyone contributes to the group. And this is where a little bit later I'll talk about some skills, but making sure that you understand kind of your biases and that you are making sure that you are attending to what everyone is contributing and that it's getting heard so that all those voices are heard. All right, so thinking about some strategies. When we go back to some of those building blocks of the agenda, the processes to get to our outcomes, this is where the activities come in. So some of these are going to seem pretty common sense, but they're actually really important. So if applicable, kind of starting with the end so that the group knows where you're going. So this is what we're trying to get to today. These are the goals that we're wanting to accomplish so they can see the big picture. Also using some phrases when you are facilitating some activity so that they know exactly what to do and when to do it. Also having instructions written down. Some people are going to need to see them and some people can just hear them if they're a little bit more of an auditory learner. And then starting with verbs in each step so people know exactly what actions to do. Cutting out superfluous words. Identifying the time frame, exactly how long people have to work on it, and kind of avoiding ranges so that people aren't sure how long this could be going on. If you say this could be 10 to 30 minutes, well, that's a pretty big range. So just say you have X amount of time. And a lot of times I'll use some weird numbers so they know exactly, like you have 13 minutes to work on this or 17 minutes to work on this. And then giving directions when they complete the task. So what is that next step? So some of these, like I said, seem kind of common sense, but something as simple as not having the instructions written down can really cause confusion and prolong the process. So you may know what you want and what you're doing, but that doesn't mean that others necessarily know that. So having everything spelled out is always really helpful. And there's also a lot of different ways to break up people into groups. So you can always just count off if you're okay with random. You can also pull people together if you have some like characteristics using other variations like playing cards or sticker cards that you're passing out to people. And that way you know you're going to have an even number. By characteristic, use caution with this because you can have quite an uneven number if you're thinking, okay, let's just everyone with red come together. Well, if you have a group of Buckeyes together, you're probably going to have a lot of people with red, and then the folks with other colored shirts might have an uneven number. So just kind of read the room and see how you might be able to break them up. If these aren't very long activities, it may not matter. You can also think about what you want to accomplish. So by pulling people together by ability or maybe their knowledge on a topic or role could be helpful. You might want all the same folks together if you're really wanting to get a deep understanding of a topic, whatever they're working on. But you might want to also mix people up. So again, this depends on your purpose and what type of information you're trying to get out of the group. You can also do self-selection, but this can default to folks that know each other still working with people that they know each other really well, or somebody working with folks that if they know really well, they're off task the whole time. I have definitely been guilty of that as well. So it's always better if I work with people that I don't know quite as well, because then I don't want to chit chat about other things. So use caution with self-selection, but it can also work, especially if it's at a point where people might want a little bit more autonomy in terms of what group they're going to be working with. So a few strategies, and again, the Kaner book that I mentioned earlier has a lot of different types of strategies as well. And the way that in that book, they kind of string different activities together. These are kind of some bigger activities to do, but remember that an activity can be as simple as having people individually write to themselves first and then start to share out, or just create a list, and you can string things together in order to meet your outcome and get the information that you want. But of course, we've all heard of brainstorming, but there are some things that need to be set in place for brainstorming to be successful. First and foremost, your topic has to be very specific. So it can't just be like, hey, we just need to think about some ideas for this upcoming event. What specifically, what part of that event do you need ideas for? Or what part of a program are you needing ideas for? And brainstorming is also not necessarily a good strategy for all those different types of meetings that I mentioned earlier. This is a good strategy for providing input or advancing thinking, and maybe not necessarily for decision making yet, unless you really are trying to get a bunch of ideas before you make some decisions. So beginning with a specific topic, and then allowing some times for folks to collect their thoughts. We give a time limit for that. Having people write things down a lot of times first helps before they're going to share out, so they might have several things that they want to share. Identifying a recorder and then making sure that everyone can see and stay engaged during this whole time. And the facilitator needs to explain how to brainstorm, set the ground rules, and then this is where things get tricky, because the facilitator should not take the lead or take over the discussion, and should continue to kind of enforce those ground rules. So really taking a step back. There are a lot of different sets of ground rules that people have come up with for brainstorming. This is just one of them. And so the idea behind brainstorming is to try to get, of course, as many ideas out there. So not having any evaluation of those ideas is important, because you want them all to continue to be on the table. Later, if you're needing to pare down or put things into themes, if the group decides that something can get dropped off, then that's okay. But no evaluation in the beginning, just get everything out there. These can be the wildest possible ideas, because a lot of times you're wanting the creativity to flow. You're needing to think outside the box. And so also, in order to do that, getting as many ideas out there as possible, and then building upon each other's ideas. So, you know, if someone thinks there's just another nuance to something, have them put that up there as well. Okay, so really encouraging getting as much stuff up there as possible. So there are some concerns with brainstorming. So the facilitator does give some control above the group. So if you are a leader or a manager of a group and you have an agenda, this brainstorming process can be a little bit difficult, because you are really giving the group the process. Also, if participants don't have any knowledge or experience about which to discuss new concepts, then you might be a little bit limited. So think about what the topic is, and that, you know, are folks going to be as knowledgeable as they need to be to really get those creative juices flowing. The facilitator also has to keep the discussion focused on the topic. So you might need to bring people back if you're getting too far afield. Also being aware of folks that are dominating the group. So we'll talk a little bit about managing some discussions later. But you might want to try to call on some other people to get some other ideas out there. Remember, there's no evaluation, so anything can continue to go up. And one thing to also consider is that open dialogue is, sorry, there's a typo there, is not natural in all cultures. And so depending on who you have in the room, there might be some people that aren't going to necessarily share in the group. They are much more comfortable with sharing one-on-one. This also could be an opportunity of doing things also in writing, so people aren't sharing out verbally. Can you get some things and then get them up on a board later, or pull a bunch of ideas together and then present out at another meeting? So think about, if someone is not participating, is it that they are introverted, or is it also something that could be cultural and they don't necessarily want to share? So this is kind of a twist on brainstorming. And so if you have your topic stated in the form of a goal, you want to take that and reverse it, okay? So you want to think about like, how can you achieve the opposite of the actual goal? So for example, it's like, how could we design the worst information packet for parents? Okay. And then you can come up with a few of those ideas and have the group list those questions. And then ask participants to brainstorm solutions to the reverse questions. So for example, an info packet for parents wouldn't contain any contacts for our programs. And so this seems, of course, a little backwards because it is reverse, but you look over those solutions and then explore what might actually stimulate positive thinking about this original goal. So it's just a different way of approaching it. Might seem a little silly at first, but it can get folks to think outside the box. There is another strategy that I didn't put in here, but is also an idea of this reverse type of thinking, where if you are trying to work through a problem with your group, you can do a scenario planning, and you have a best case scenario and a worst case scenario. And each group has to kind of think about the events that led up to this worst case scenario. And then the groups come together. And so you start to think through problems a little differently if you have to think about what actually made this the worst case rather than the best case. And then come together and see if you can find some positive goals to work towards. So sticky note data collecting is another strategy that you can use, especially if you are trying to come up with some different groupings or themes, or thinking about different attributes of programs. But you're presenting your topic or your question, and everyone is writing their ideas on separate sticky notes. You have data collection areas, which can just be a wall, or they can be some of your big chart paper. And you start to sort your sticky notes by clusters or bar charts. And you can do this yourself. You can also have people co-facilitate or have participants self-sort themselves, and then start looking around at your findings. So what were some of the themes that you saw? Some things need to move to some other clusters, and then you're going from there. So if you're using this as some part of action planning, once you have your themes and you have your ideas, then you'll want to think about what your next steps are going to be. But this is another way to get a lot of ideas out there and start to get them organized. Dot voting can be helpful, especially if you're wanting to do some decision making. So posing a question to the group and then garnering possible solutions or answers. And then you're allowing some voting with dots. So you can also think about color codes for certain groups that you might have, so you can kind of track how certain groups are feeling about that topic. You also want to consider how many dots or votes that you have, so whether or not you can vote more than once for one item, and then discussing the results and thinking about, well, why might a lot of people liked this idea and not this other one. So this is a way to get a lot of solutions and answers, and then get some type of majority so that you're able to make the decision. Now, with any activity that you're facilitating, at some point you are going to have a discussion. Whether you are debriefing an activity, you are then taking your brainstorm and then doing something with that and working it into an action plan. And this is where things can get tricky. So we often want equal participation from people, but we know that's not necessarily going to be the case. So oftentimes individuals want to dominate and other folks really want to fade into the background. And also people need time to process. So that's something to consider. I think I mentioned it earlier, but with all of your activities, is there a way, especially for introverts, to have time to think a little bit beforehand, even if you send some questions and topics out beforehand, get folks to think, maybe write things down. Also having people share with one another in a pair until before sharing out into a larger group can also help with some of that processing. But once you are getting folks together and engaged in discussion, these are just a few different tactics to help to manage that. So first, calling for responses. So trying to build upon what someone had mentioned or what a group has presented. So just asking for responses, reactions, or if anyone has any questions. Now, if you have a lot of people wanting to participate at the same time, you can think about stacking. And this is just a good way to track so that you're making sure everyone is able to participate. So if a bunch of people are wanting to talk at once, like just, hey, who all wants to speak? Please raise your hand. And then before, just kind of assign the order. All right, Brandon will be first, then Tanya, and then we'll go here, come back to here. And if you have, a really hot topic, then of course this comes into play, and you want to make sure that all the voices are heard. So that's stacking. When you think that people might be holding back in order to avoid an argument or try to ease the tension, you can do some balancing. So actually asking for some other perspectives. So are there other ways of looking at this? Would someone like to play devil's advocate for a moment? So opening up that opportunity for people to give a different perspective. And of course, the way that you deliver this is really important as well. So if you do know that it's something that might be causing a little conflict, you want to be presenting yourself as neutral as possible. So are there other ways to look at this? Inviting, it's okay that there are other ways to look at this. Now the mirror of balancing is finding like minds. So oftentimes this is used if you want to get more people engaged. So finding other people that feel similarly. Has anyone had a comparable experience, and can you tell us that? And you might get some nuances here too. They may not be saying the exact same things that other people had said before and are actually enriching the discussion. And then there's, of course, folks that maybe don't want to speak, but you can tell that they want to say something. And so a lot of times people will make gestures that show that they want to speak. So sometimes people will kind of raise their chin up a little bit, like they're thinking, kind of in a reverse nod, or they might crinkle up their nose if they disagree with something. Oftentimes people will look directly at the facilitator and they won't say anything, but they will look and you can tell that they want to say something. And so this is just specifically calling on people if you see some of that body language. Letitia, it looked like you were going to say something a couple minutes ago. Philip, you look as you might want to speak. Is that true? And you have to really know your group for using the making space strategies because some people, of course, don't want to be called out. But you could also give them an out. It's okay if you don't. It just looked like you may have wanted to say something, and that's okay as well. So knowing your crowd is important here. But sometimes people just need to be acknowledged, and then they will share what they're thinking. And of course, the other thing that's difficult when managing discussions is tolerating silences. So this is also called wait time. But silences mean that people are thinking, usually, unless you've really been on a topic for a long time and you think you've gotten all of the opinions out there. A typical silence is 3 to 5 seconds, and a painfully long silence is 10 to 15 seconds. And I have to say that as a teacher, wait time was something that was really difficult for me to learn and get comfortable with. And so this is something that you can practice with a friend. Say, okay, we're going to sit in silence for 5 seconds and see what that feels like. And then sit in silence for 15 seconds and you'll see how awkward that feels. But this kind of gives you a feel for how long you want to wait. Then if no one is going to respond, go ahead and move on. But sometimes people will come in kind of at that last moment because they had enough time to process and then they want to share out. Now for my students in class, when I want an answer, I will wait for a painfully long time. And almost always someone comes and saves the day. But when you're facilitating a group, that might be a little bit different. So you don't want to torture them for too long. So there are a lot of different skills that a facilitator can develop. And the ones that I'm focusing on are just a few, but the first one is really important. So thinking about empathy. Empathy is coming up more and more in terms of leadership, training and development. And some people think that either you are able to be empathetic and it's something that's natural, or you just don't have it. And that's not the case. You can develop more empathy. But empathy, thought of as the ability to experience and relate to the thoughts, emotions, or experience of others. So some things to keep in mind. When we understand others, we're able to develop closer relationships with them. And empathy includes both listening, openness, and understanding. So when we understand the folks that we're working with in a team or a group, then we have a better idea of the challenges ahead of us. And we can kind of help foresee some barriers that might come up because we know what people are experiencing. But empathy does take work. So there are some things that you can do to help develop it. Also, when we think about out-group members, oftentimes those are the people that we need to understand even more, and we don't want to dismiss them. And out-groups are those that don't identify with the larger group or organization, but that doesn't mean that people in an out-group are always in the out-group. An out-group could be around a particular issue, or it might be with the group as a whole. But it can change depending on what it is that you're working on. But out-group members are important to consider because if they are not happy with what the work of the group and how the work of the group is growing, rather, they cannot thwart the progress. I need some more coffee. And they can also impact the culture of that group or organization. So I just wanted to hear from you all for a moment. What are some examples of the ways someone can be in an out-group? What is a group you've worked with and who has maybe ended up being a part of that out-group? And also, what are some ways that you have been able to account for those out-group voices?
Hello, test. Hi, Jera. It's
Hi.
Justin. Hi.
Hi.
So yeah, this is funny because I was just talking, this just happened to me last week. I was talking with my wife about it. I have a cartoons program put on once a month. I do it in a way that's pretty interactive discussion based because we have both parents and kids. This is for youth who have had some sort of traffic violation.
Uh-huh.
And this last week, I had a family that was Indian, and it was just very, very difficult to get them engaged, respectfully so, because of I'm assuming their culture or whatever, but it was just a lot more difficult for them to feel comfortable. And so I often would say something of, like, we're going to do this activity, and then step aside and have a conversation with them as well of that if they wanted to not be a part of it or step out or whatever, they have that option. Just let me know so I can accommodate for them. And so I think that's just, it was difficult for me at first just because I'm used to that program just moving so fast. And so it took me a second to step back and kind of change the way I was engaging with the whole group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we, may not be able to assume that it is based on culture, but there are a lot of different cultural differences in terms of how people engage with groups and how comfortable they feel about speaking up and participating. Right. But yes, giving people the options to maybe step aside, not participating is one way to address that for sure. Thank you.
I have another possible example.
Yes.
And how do you handle, or what is it like when somebody is an out-group because they're not engaged in the mission of the group and have their own agenda?
Yeah.
That's one that is hard for me to navigate.
Mm-hmm. And I'll go ahead and click to the next slide, and then if anyone else wants to share, that would be great. But sometimes being curious and reflective helps. Oftentimes we don't know the entire story of what's going on, and it might take some time to kind of uncover that. But some questions we can ask ourselves and then actually ask folks that we might perceive as being part of the out group is how a situation might be affecting them, and how might something be keeping them from succeeding or performing. So people might be facing some different barriers that we didn't realize before, and we need to uncover those. And what would be the ideal outcome? So these are actually questions that we can ask people, or kind of think through what are some other possible things that could be going on. And I don't know if that helps a little bit, but sometimes, we have some blinders on because of our own experiences. And it could just be that someone had an experience, and they had a bad experience with someone or a group or within a certain organization. And that has kind of tainted their view of the work that's going on. But then flipping that to the next, like using these feeling verbs, this is actually not the way we're trained to talk to people about what's going on. Usually when people share something's going on, that will be like, oh man, I'm sorry about that, right? Or that's too bad. But actually reflecting on how they might be feeling or clarifying what they're feeling actually gives them the space to express it and then feel like they're heard. So saying something like, man, that must be really exhausting, or did that make you angry? Did that make you frustrated? And then they might expand on that. This is something that I've had to practice quite a bit because it didn't necessarily come naturally. It may come naturally to some people. But what I had always heard was just kind of like, oh, that's too bad. I'm sorry about that. Instead of actually opening it up for them to express themselves a little bit more. But a little bit of this can actually go a long way. And you might be able to uncover what's actually going on. And so depending on the group that you're working with, if you're just facilitating something for a day and some people seem to be very disengaged, having a conversation during a break can kind of help you to understand them a little bit more. If this is more of a long-term relationship with a board or a team that you're working with, then finding some time as you're developing those relationships to kind of ask some of those questions. Any other thoughts on outgroups and how to engage folks or make sure that those voices are heard? Okay, well, thank you all for sharing. So active listening, I won't stay here very long. There are some different ways to approach active listening. This is a list that I think is pretty helpful in terms of how you can make sure that the person who is speaking knows that you're engaged. Also includes some empathy if you look at step 8, so trying to feel what the speaker is feeling. So I'll skip over that so we have some time for questions at the end. So this one is important as well. And so we all have bias, and even though we like to think that we don't, but we do, and that's a whole other training. There is an unconscious bias training, and it actually gets into some of those cultural values. So I talked about participation, speaking out in front of the group, and maybe how we even attack tasks, how we see time. A lot of those things are cultural and how we've been raised and the cues that we've learned from our family, our friends, our institutions, etc. And so we all have certain ways that we prefer to do things, what we feel comfortable with. And so we have to reflect on that, and that takes some work. So a couple things to think about. First of all, if you're a leader or a manager, you have to address the power that you have with a group. So when I talked about brainstorming earlier about the facilitator not weighing in, If you have power in a group and you start to weigh in on what it is that you actually prefer and want, then that is going to shape the outcomes of the group. So if you really want the group to lead a process, you have to be the facilitator for a moment and not necessarily the leader or manager. And you have to think about how what you are putting out there is going to impact the group. Also reflecting and acknowledging the biases that you hold. So this can not only be the ways in which we like to work, but we also have certain biases that we might hold related to gender or age or race, ethnicity. All of this gets transmitted through our media and through narratives and how we're grown. So again, it's a whole different training, but this is work, especially when you're facilitating groups, a lot of different types of people to reflect on and continue to work on. Also, we tend to like people that are like ourselves. And so we might pay more attention to people that are like ourselves, and we might value the ideas of people like ourselves that are putting forth. So how can we temper that bias in those spaces when we are facilitating and making sure that everyone's ideas are valued? And then also avoiding giving your opinion or topic or issue during the meeting session. That kind of goes back to that first point. Now, you might decide that you are part of the process, but making sure that that's very clear. So you have to decide, what is that role that you're playing there? Are you only facilitating and being completely unbiased, or are you part of the process? And depending on how serious your topic is, you know, that's going to depend on the role that you want to play there. So thinking about putting these together, you know, having a plan, thinking about what your purpose is, and thinking about a combination of techniques that will accomplish your goals. So I only mentioned a few strategies today, but some things can be put together very simply, having people think themselves, listing things, ranking things, then coming together, starting to do some planning. So setting the stage for how you want the group to work together with those ground rules and norms and your objectives, and then facilitating. So being an active listener, modeling the behaviors that you want to see with your group, and enforcing the ground rules where need be so that you keep everyone on track. And then thinking about that closure. So what are your next steps? Because I think we've all gone to a meeting where we left and we're like, well, what do we do now? We didn't get anywhere. So being really explicit about what the roles and responsibilities are, and do you need a follow-up meeting to keep working? If, you know, folks may not be able to be accountable on their own, do we need to pull together again? And then thinking about a follow-through. So do you need to do some type of follow-through in the end? So any other questions that you have in the 2 minutes that we have remaining? And I also, if there's or any other resources that that you want that I mentioned today, please feel free to email me. I'm happy to send things along. But any other questions using chat or the microphone?
As folks are thinking, I'll just come on and say thank you very much again, Jara, for your time and for your presentation. I very much appreciated some very applicable and actionable things that I think we can use in our meetings. So thank you very much for your time. As she mentioned, go ahead and ask your questions if anyone has any.
And as you are typing up your questions or getting ready to ask them, Jara is an expert in facilitation, and she offers a 6-hour session that's going to be held on August the 12th. But while you're filling out your evaluations, if there's other topics that that fit in facilitation that you want more information on, Jared and I will be planning next year's ACEL2 extension, and so your thoughts and ideas are going to be well thought of and part of our plan. So if there is a certain topic about facilitation that you want more of, please let us know.
Yeah, because there's so many different parts to this. And this was just a little sprinkling of a lot of different things. So, and this is the it's backwards, but this is the Kaner book that I mentioned earlier. So you can see it's a big resource, has a lot of different processes in it that are explained out, as well as different ways to build an agenda. It's a really great resource if you're going to be facilitating a lot of groups, if you're going to be doing strategic planning with groups. It's a really good one. I highly recommend it. All right, that's long enough wait time.
Yeah, that uncomfortable silence. So we do, I do have the survey link in the chat box. You'll also get an email either today or tomorrow with that link as well. I may wait until the recording is ready so we can send it all out in one email. So it may be tomorrow or potentially even Friday, depending on how long that takes. But so this is recorded. It will be posted on the ACL2 Extension site. So that you can view it in the future. I think you all were emailed the slide deck as well this morning. Thank you, Jared, for providing that. So please make sure to use that survey to provide your feedback, like Beth mentioned.
All right.
Is this question time or is that?
Oh, yeah.
I'm not clear on the reverse brainstorming. Can you kind of explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, so you actually want to think of a goal. So if you have a particular task you want to get accomplished, whether that's developing a program or developing a certain type of resource or a new strategy, come up with a really specific goal. And then you want to do the opposite of it. So if we want to be like, we want to develop a high quality youth program focused on something specific, you would reverse it and be like, okay, how would we develop the worst youth program focused on this? And I know it sounds kind of silly, but when you start to think about all of the things that would make something really bad, other ideas of what could make it really good can emerge from the group. So it's this idea of just kind of getting people thinking in a little different way. And as I mentioned, I also, if anyone's interested in the scenario planning, so this is actually good for visioning, but you can do the reverse as well. So you say, you know, it's 2025 and we have the best 4-H program in, you know, the state of Ohio. How did we get here? And another group is working on that they are the worst 4-H program in the state of Ohio. How did we get here? They're doing a timeline and building how they got to the best or worst, and then everyone comes together and shares. And so again, it's this different way. Can we think about all of not only the opportunities, but what are some of the pitfalls and barriers, and then come together to really build a good plan. So if anyone wants a sample of that and instructions, just email me. It's called Blue World, Green World, and I use that in my classes.
Can you go ahead and send that to us?
Sure. I will do it.
Yeah, Jared, if you want to send that my way, I can get it out with the follow-up email.
I will do it.
That sounds like a great activity.
All right.
All right. Well, seeing nothing else coming through, I think we may have reached our end for today. So thank you again, Jared, and thank you all for being an attentive audience and participating today. We will have several other emails coming out. Again, we have 5 more of these sessions for ACL2 Extension, but if you'd like to kind of learn on your own too, it's go.osu.edu/ACL2 Extension. And you can get all the information, and that's where the previous recordings are also posted if you'd like to see any of those. So thank you all, and have a good rest of the day.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Have a good day, everybody.